This work imagines a reunion for the Italian-American residents of a Ducktown street across multiple generations. This is the family that lives on the block now. Although immigrant family stories are complicated and unique, when we listen closely, they often rhyme with the stories our family told us. The bravery and the decision to come, the initial struggles, the help from strangers, and what it took to thrive and build a family are repeated time and again.
This sounds like a quintessentially and wonderfully American story.
Yeah, I think so.
As an art student in the 1970s, Janice Merendino shot photos of her grandmother's house in the Ducktown neighborhood of Atlantic City. 50 years later, during the pandemic, she made a series of artworks based on them. As a kid, Janice had lived a few houses down from her grandmom, but hadn't been there for decades. But she went back to check out the neighborhood, and in 2024, she mounted an exhibition called Ducktown, an Atlantic City immigration story. Janice, how did the old neighborhood look after all those years?
It was exciting, John. I was warmly greeted by residents who were from Bangladesh, and the store around the corner where we were sent as kids now had a Spanish name. A neighborhood does hold the stories of the people who live there, and those stories will change as the people change over time. But my question was, is there something about a place that remains constant even as different people move through it? I tried to create work that shows what hasn't changed between the family life of my Italian immigrant grandparents in the 1900s and life in the neighborhood today. One of the first times that Steffi and I came to the neighborhood to start the project, this young man came barreling down the steps, and the first thing he said to us is, "Are you Italian?" And I'll never forget that. And we said, "Yes." And before you know it, other neighbors came out with a photo album because they wanted to show me all of the Italians that they befriended when they first moved into the neighborhood. It was such a warm experience to know that they were welcomed. One of the older women pointed to a picture and she said, "She was like my mother, she was like my mother," pointing to the picture of the Italian woman. So it really felt like this is the story that doesn't get told, that people are welcomed into communities.
And what was the background of these people?
They were all from Bangladesh.
Oh. The new families were more than willing to give Janice access to what she needed most, which was
2 homes that meant a lot to me, my grandmother's and the nearby apartment building where I spent my early childhood.
Okay, the Italian immigrants. How did your mother's side get here?
In 1920, when she was 19 years old, my maternal grandmother came to Ducktown from Italy for an arranged marriage. She told us that she arrived with only a picture of her potential husband. He was wearing a stylish straw hat, and she thought he might be hiding thinning hair. She shouldn't have worried. My grandfather had a thick head of hair. He arrived from Italy when he was a teenager in 1911. He was an only child whose parents had died young. The ship manifest shows that he came here with a cousin to live with an uncle in Atlantic City. He worked as a laborer in the city department, cleaning streets, and as a cement worker employed by the WPA. He helped to build the Atlantic City Convention Hall. As an immigrant garment worker, my grandmother worked in factories that helped with the war effort by patching soldiers' uniforms. Married in 1920, they raised 4 children.
How about your father's side?
This is a photographic portrait of my paternal grandparents whom I never met. We see a sweet hint of my grandmother's personality from their linked pinky fingers. They arrived from Italy in 1904. My grandmother was the mother of 13 children. My grandmother was pregnant with my father in this photo. My grandfather purchased a small apartment building in 1919 to house his large family.
Speaking of entwined pinky fingers, tell me about this woman.
My cousin Stephanie Dantro was a partner in this project. Among other things, she was responsible for researching the past residents of the two properties through census records, city directories, archival newspaper clippings, and maps. This map of 1887 shows what was later known as the Ducktown area of Atlantic City. Many of its inhabitants were immigrants from Great Britain, Germany, and Ireland. You'll see a narrow-gauge train track in the neighborhood. The Atlantic County Historical Society helped us to identify the kind of train that would have been running at that time.
Having a big interconnected family in that apartment building was not the exception, it was the rule.
The census of 1900 showed the 13 members of the Robinson family in the building, which was later home to my father and his 11 siblings. One of my aunts lived in the building continuously from 1919 until the 1970s. We know our parents were once young, but seeing their ages on the census and situating them in a time and place helps to bring their stories alive. It was exciting for Stephanie and me to connect with past residents and then the current residents to share our family photos and collect their family stories. How many graduations, parties, and other celebrations did this building witness over the century?
Let's hear some stories of your childhood.
Growing up in an apartment building as a kid offered a special kind of freedom. Because it was filled with so many aunts and uncles on different floors, we could rule the building running from cousin to play. My cousin Joey remembers going to the train station to get crates of grapes so that my grandfather could make wine before Thanksgiving. I was surprised to learn that there was a similar wine-making tradition at the apartment building. A former resident shared how once a year, a truck pulled up to deliver boxes of grapes on a conveyor belt that went straight into the basement. In tossing nickels, my cousin remembers how my Aunt Josephine would throw nickels out of the window for her to go to the corner store for bread, and then she would have to deliver it to the upstairs apartment.
Huh, that makes me a little hungry. Where can we get some bread? Can you go get me some? Where's?
Sure. You give me those coins and I'll run right over to Rando's Bakery across the street and get you some Italian bread.
All righty. Randos. This little girl looks like she needs some change to go to the market. Is that you also?
Yes, that's me also.
My grandfather, like many Italian immigrants, knew that his fig trees could only survive the winters if they were covered in burlap. Apparently, my young cousin thought that the wrap trees were giant presents and decided to unwrap them after my grandfather had just finished covering them. When my aunt heard my grandfather cursing loudly, she told my young cousin to go and hide in the apartment on the third floor until my grandfather calmed down. There were quirky memories from growing up in an apartment building. One was watching my mother bang on the pipes with a teaspoon to signal my aunt, who lived in the downstairs apartment, when it was time for afternoon tea. One Christmas, my uncle bought us this circus clown that could balance on a high wire. As kids, we would sit at either end of the long hallway as the clown delivered messages to us back and forth on a tiny piece of paper. Butter cookies were always our snack. This work depicts the A&P grocery store, possibly on Florida and Arctic Avenue, which was the first job my father had as a teenager. He's pictured in the middle. Small businesses often have family members to pitch in work, but also continue to rely on neighborhood teens looking for work.
How's life in the neighborhood for the current residents?
The neighborhood retains the qualities I remember loving about it as a child. I did this next painting based on the memories of a young woman who lives there now. When I asked her about playing in the backyard, this is what she told me. We played outside to pass time. The parents would sit outside on lawn chairs gossiping while drinking tea or gardening, while the kids played ball or tag. The ball would go over to the neighbor's side and we would have to sneak in and throw it back over. Or it would be kicked onto our mom's precious plants and we would get yelled at. Us kids also really liked swinging on the big green fence. We were a very close-knit family. We would celebrate birthdays together, run from one floor to the next, and the moms would exchange curries.
Can you read that letter from the young Bangladeshi American woman?
I was born in Bangladesh. My family and my relatives immigrated to the U.S. in 2008 when I was 3 years old. We lived in Pleasantville for a couple months and then moved to the apartment building in 2009. On the first floor, I lived with my immediate family and my uncle's family. On the second floor lived one of my aunt's family. On the third floor lived another one of my aunts. It was a full house. I grew up with my cousins and we made do with what we had, which was not very much at the time.
Though the vast majority of artworks in the exhibition were made by Janice, there are some artworks that were made by others.
Brain research tells us that episodic memory is the strongest memory. That's probably why when I asked my cousins to draw their childhood memories, mishaps and mistakes were a common theme. My cousin Dennis remembered being chased on the steps and crashing into the door. My cousin Stephanie remembers learning to ride a two-wheeler bike and crashing into the trash cans.
Janice's cousins are amateurs, but a current resident is a very serious artist whose work has eerie parallels to that of Janice's grandmother.
I met a young artist named Farzana, who lives there, was very anxious to show me her artwork. And she does these very intense little mandalas. They reminded me so much of my grandmother's and my mother's crochet work in the same house. So I made rubbings and I did ink paintings of my grandmother's crochet along with my mother's crochet, and I incorporated Farzana, who lives in the house now.
I love art by kids, and thanks to Janice's innovative thinking, some of that is in the show as well.
Early on in the project, I decided I wanted to involve kids, because we were kids when we were here. Proof that you were growing up was the adventure of being allowed to go to the corner store by yourself for the first time and being trusted to get your mother's order correct. The thrill of eyeing the candy display is a strong memory for a child. Even today, children still negotiate with their parents about keeping some change to buy a treat. These familiar stories of the corner stores resonate through time. We held this pop-up outdoor event to recognize the importance of corner stores in the community and to collect children's drawings for this piece. We bought candy and snacks from 2 corner stores, then posted signs in both English and Spanish that read, "We love our corner stores. Pick your favorite candy or snack, draw it, and take it." I've done a marker drawing of the inside of what is now La Tipica, the corner store, and I incorporated all of the child's drawings in with my work.
So many of the pictures in Janice's show illustrate the concept of then and now, then and now. I
thought about the history of a place, imagining how many times one spot had changed. The current residents of my grandmother's home are immigrants from Bangladesh. They graciously allowed me to photograph the rooms there. I used that opportunity to stand in the same spots I had photographed 50 years earlier to see the spaces anew with their current personality and style. I felt that although we weren't related by blood, we were related by place. If there was one place in Ducktown that I was most curious about seeing, it was this corner of my maternal grandparents' home where my grandfather's chair once sat. A colorful vase with bright, cheerful flowers now sits in that corner.
Bathroom sinks then and now.
My grandmother's kitchen sink was updated in our neighbor's kitchen.
Here are some vanities and some desks.
Based on past and present photos, a formal Sunday dinner space turns into a raucous dance hall where chairs from different families get together for a party. On most Sundays, my Italian immigrant grandmother rolled out pasta for our traditional Sunday dinner. On a Sunday 60 years later, another immigrant mother from Bangladesh is making samosa in the very same kitchen and inviting me to stay for lunch. While the home is the center of family life, the barbershop is a gathering space outside of it. This painting collages some of the past neighborhood barbers and barbershops over the years. A picture from the 1950s shows Phil's barbershop, 1940 to 1960, on Arctic Avenue. Each generation can recount their trips there and their first haircuts with their fathers. In another old photo, I spotted the barbershop pole in the distance that my cousin said he remembered was stolen when he was a kid. I can only imagine the neighborhood stories about that incident. The vibrancy of a neighborhood depends on it being a welcoming place. Only one door away from what was Phil's barbershop, the new Dominican barbershop continues to make the neighborhood memories.
Janice has a number of beautiful portraits over time.
An old photo of my grandfather holding my sister near a utility pole inspired this series. As I looked through other family photos from the 1930s and 40s, I was amused by how many others posed in front of that same nondescript pole. This work introduces this photo spot to current residents by asking them to pose there too. I was struck by how many of my old family photos showed adults posing with babies. This series shows how those babies represent hope for the future and begins with my grandmother holding my father in 1919 and concludes with one of the two children born in 2023 during this 2-year project.
This project made Janice realize how precious memories are.
Many children of the 40s and 50s remember sheer curtains and Venetian blinds. These sheer curtains that hung in our living room struck me as a metaphor for the entire exhibition. So many details of my grandparents' lives and their children's lives are obscured and filtered through weak memories. Other stories are totally lost or hidden and opaque, like the blinds. So I hope you take away with you the message to ask more questions, record your family stories, and label your old photos. Working on this project made me realize that anywhere you're standing, someone has stood before, and someone's going to stand after you. So if we get the history right, we have a richer story to tell.
Janice, I say this from the bottom of my heart. Your beautiful art and uplifting stories should be seen and heard by all Americans. In a challenging time, you remind us of who we truly are.